When will enough be enough? That is the headline of this new, let me get to focus here, this new Ohio Capitol Journal hit piece against gun owners that came out a couple of days ago that you guys sent on to us. And I'm not going to go through this thing line by line. I'm just going to make some comments about it. But we're in this article, a handful of Democrat politicians, let me get my stuff in order here. They're pushing a fresh batch of so-called common sense gun control bills, whatever the heck that means. But let me just ask a better question here. When will they take responsibility for torching their own cities, their own communities, their own culture, and then blaming law-abiding gun owners like you and me for the results? Huh? Because that's what this entire article is. It is a hit piece dressed up as a policy proposal. This is nothing in here is about fixing violence. It's about offloading the blame for decades of failed Democrat, leftist, cultural Marxist policies, and then dumping it at the feet of the gun-owning middle class like you and me. So in the article here, they toss out a bunch of scary numbers. They say 571 so-called gun-related deaths in Ohio last year, as if, let me get to it here, as if the gun is somehow the cause, right? But funny thing is, they never define that term. They never define the term gun violence, because if they did, well, the whole narrative falls apart. Gun-related deaths includes suicides. It includes criminals shot by the police. And most of all, it includes gang violence and criminal activity in the inner cities that have been run into the ground by Democrats for generations now. But you're not allowed to say that. I'm not allowed to read this article and point that out. And neither did the marble-brained reporter. What's her name here? Megan, let me get to it here. Megan Henry. The marble-brained reporter, Megan Henry from the Ohio Capitol Journal, she didn't ask that question either. You're not allowed to point out the root cause anymore, the real root cause. And that is the radical left's intentional destruction of the nuclear family, the Marxists' systematic dismantling of fatherhood, and quite frankly, the moral rot that's been spreading ever since the left decided to replace dads in our families with government checks and discipline with identity politics. So instead of facing what they've done, they shift the blame. They invent undefined phrases like gun violence and gun-related deaths to make the gun itself the villain, or you and I, because we demand to keep them, we then become the villains. That way, the problem is always vague. The enemy is everyone, every gun owner, and the solution is always the same: more power for them, less freedom for you. So let me take a look here. Let's take a look at some of the bills that they're pushing in this article. Pardon me. The first one is House Bill 45, which is universal background checks. This is introduced by Reps Cecil Thomas, of course, and Representative Rachel Baker, feminazi leftist from the Cincinnati area. Now, universal background checks, it sounds good until you realize that it's just code for banning private sales and forcing every transaction into a government database. And in case they didn't, they know this, you know this, everybody knows this, criminals don't use background checks. They steal guns. They borrow them from their buddies. They buy them out of car trunks. House Bill 45 won't stop one single killer, but it will create a paper trail for the government to use against the rest of us. That's what universal gun registration has always been about. That's why Michael Bloomberg has dumped millions of dollars. I don't know. He's dumped a lot of money into this thing over the years. I don't know if it's into the billions, but millions and millions. This is what the gun control crowd focuses on the most. They need to know who owns what guns and where they live. And that's the database that they will use against us at some point down the road. The other one here, House Bill 46. This is also introduced by Reps Cecil Thomas and Michelle Grimm, both a bunch of Democrats. Red flag laws and a 10-day waiting period packed into one piece of legislation. So basically, it's like, here's your due process rights. This is what their bill does, rips them apart and chucks them right in the trash, right? That's what this bill does. Shreds and tosses your due process rights. These laws let them strip you of your rights before you've been charged, tried, or convicted of a crime. And if you're an Ohio gun owners member for any length of time, you know very good and well what red flag laws are, because we've stopped them under John Kasich. We stopped them under Mike DeWine. We stopped the legislation itself from probably over half a dozen rhino Republicans so far. And that's now what the Democrats are coalescing around. They've just brushed off these rhino-sponsored gun control bills, and now they're trying to introduce them again. Also in House Bill 46 is the 10-day waiting period. A 10-day waiting period? Name one mass shooter that was stopped by a calendar. It's pure fantasy. It is pure fantasy, and that's what the gun control agenda is. Then there's another one. Hold on here. It's House Bill 235, which is basically tax gimmicks and for storage and training. Here's the real translation on that stuff. We'll give you a little tax break if you comply with our gun control culture. No thanks. This is America. Our rights are not a coupon. They are not conditional. They're not taxable. And for the record, they're also not bestowed on us by our government. They're given to us by Almighty God and defended by force if necessary. One thing I want to point out here, Democrat Cecil Thomas asks, when will enough be enough? That's basically the headline of the article. I'll tell you when, Cecil. Enough is enough when you stop mismanaging the cities that your party has been running into the gutter for 40 years. Enough is when you guys take responsibility for driving fathers out of the home by ushering in the welfare state and replacing discipline with chaos. Enough is enough when you stop covering for the criminals and start defending the innocent. That's enough. That's when. Another thing I want to point out in here, Michelle Grimm. Where'd it go here? Oh, yes, Michelle Grimm, state representative, Democrat. She admits it right here in the article that the radical left will seize our guns the second that they line up the votes. That's it. She's right. She's absolutely right. The left will never play by the rules once they control the scoreboard. And if you think that they will stop with background checks and tax credits, then you haven't been paying attention. Joe Biden used to say almost weekly or President Otto Penn used to say weekly from the Rose Garden, ban assault weapons. They won't stop there. That's a fact. And this is why Ohio gun owners exist, because we understand what this fight really is. It's not about policy minutia. It's not about tweaking the Ohio Revised Code. It's about whether citizens remain armed and sovereign or become subjects of an all-powerful state. And that kind of honestly brings me to the heart of the matter here. The Second Amendment is a restriction, and I think this bears repeating. Repetition is the key to learning. The Second Amendment is a restriction on government. Let me say that again. The Second Amendment is a restriction on government, not on you and me. The founders wrote the Second Amendment into the Bill of Rights to shackle federal power. I want you guys to understand this. The founders wrote the Second Amendment into the Bill of Rights as a restriction to shackle federal power, not to regulate private citizens. And this is so much the case so that for most of our American history, the Second Amendment didn't even apply to the states, only applied to the federal government. The founders, the founding fathers feared killer criminals, of course, and that was just they barely even had to address that issue in the Federalist Papers, but they feared killer governments far more. And I would argue that anybody with Google or Wikipedia can understand this. History proves our founding fathers right. In the 20th century alone, disarmed populations were massacred by their own regimes. They were genocided by their own government. Conservative estimates start at 45 million innocent people slaughtered by their governments because they had no means to resist. And that is the end game of America's gun control movement, to make us as vulnerable and helpless as those victims were. I don't know any other way of saying this. Armed people are citizens, disarmed people are subjects, and soon after, slaves. So here's what we do. We get loud, we get and stay organized like we are here at Ohio Gun Owners, and we bury House Bill 45, House Bill 46, and House Bill 235 so deep that they never see daylight. We hold every Republican accountable, and we never, ever beg for the liberty that is already ours as a gift from Almighty God. If we let the radical left run Ohio the way they've run their own neighborhoods, the collapse would be swift and brutal. So we're not asking, we're not compromising, and we are not backing down. We are armed, we are awake, and we refuse to let these cultural Marxists, these communists, these degenerates masquerading as anything other than principled and upright people, we refuse to let them define this debate. So stay armed, stay free, and I'll see you guys on the front lines.